All right, if you want to take your Bibles this morning, we're going to read God's very words from the book of 1 Samuel. 1 Samuel, chapter 1. I found a quote by Winston Churchill who said this: "There is no doubt that it is around the family that all of the greatest virtues of human society are created, strengthened, and maintained." Listen to that again. It is around the family that all the greatest virtues of human society are created, strengthened, and maintained. How do you make a strong nation? What does a strong nation look like? Wouldn't it be the ideal nation, if you were to make it as strong as possible, it would not start from the top, it would start from the bottom. It would be with citizens who are strong in character and seek God and His ways, right? That would make an incredibly strong nation, because from that would come the leadership and everything else. How do you make people of strong character who seek God in His ways? There are many ways God uses to do that, but the major tool God uses is families. As families raise children of strong character, seek God and seek His ways, then you have a nation that can be very, very strong from the bottom up, and it all hinges on the family doing its job. And what happens when the family doesn't do its job? When the families don't build people who pursue God and seek His ways, you're going to have a lot of troubled families. And that's what we see when we look around America. I don't have to give you statistics about the fact that America's filled with trouble and troubled families. In fact, it's almost to the point now where it's more common to see troubled families than it is to see healthy families. How do we change America? How do we get America back on track and help fix these troubled families? Well, the answer is we can't. There's just too many and it's too huge. But what we can do is make sure that the family that we're part of, that's where we can make the influence. We can help make sure the family that we are part of is strong in character because we're seeking God in His ways. That's our area that we're able to influence. And that's what we want to look at this morning as we turn to God's scriptures. Today on Father's Day, we're going to look at how God says to have strong families. And it's not just for you, it's for the entire nation that we need to get this answer right. Whether you're a child or a teenager, an adult, whether you're a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle, whether you're married or not married, we all have a part to play in strengthening the families that we're parts of. We can't just go on cruise and just enjoy ourselves. We all need to work hard at this because we live in a culture, that is aggressively fighting God and His ways, and we will flow in that direction if we don't intend to go against it. So this morning we're going to look at a family in the Bible, not as a good example, but as a terrible example of how not to do a family. The family we're going to look at is probably one of the worst families in the Bible. And again, it's not to copy them, it's to avoid the mistakes they made if we see any of those signs in our families. We want to make strong families that honor God. So today, 3 lessons on having godly families from 1 Samuel. And let's begin by looking at the members of this family. Look at with me, 1 Samuel 1, verse 9 introduces us to the father. Verse 9, "Then Hannah rose after eating and drinking in Shiloh. Now Eli the priest was sitting on the seat by the doorpost of the temple of the Lord." All right, the father of this family's name is Eli. And, if you had to put a face on America, who is America right now? Well, if you had to put a face on Israel at this period, it was Eli. He was a household name. Number one, he held 2 incredibly important posts in Israel. Number one, he was one of the main priests. He had been a priest for 40 years in Israel. That means every time they went to go worship the Lord, and they were commanded multiple times a year. At this time, there was no temple. It was the tent tabernacle, and it wasn't even in Jerusalem yet. It was in a place called Shiloh, 20 miles north of Jerusalem. All the Israelites had to go there, bring their sacrifices, and take it to who? He was the main leader of the priests. His job was to shepherd Israel spiritually. His job was to teach them the ways of God. He was the religious leader in Israel, Eli, 40 years, probably about 95 years old at this chapter. Very, very important position. But the second and probably more important position he had, at least in some ways, is he was the political leader of Israel. This was before Israel had kings. He was the judge of Israel. Israel was led by the judges, and the previous judge was Samson. And after he died, Eli was appointed. And again, he's been the judge of Israel for 40 years, 95 years old. And his job was basically, in many ways, was like a traveling courtroom where he would go from town to town on a circuit on a regular basis. And when people had complaints and problems and disputes with other people, his job was to listen and dispense justice. Can you imagine how important that was? Imagine if we gave one person that job in the United States. That's what Eli's job was. The religious leader everybody came to at some point during their year, and the judge who settled all disputes and dispensed justice. What an important man. This was Eli, who we're introduced here to. Now, let's look at the children of Eli. Eli had 2 natural sons and 1 adopted son. The adopted son you know well, Samuel. We just read about his mother, Hannah. Hannah couldn't have children. She was barren. And she earnestly sought God in prayer. And God answered her and gave her a son. And ever since that time, she devoted that son's life to full-time service for the Lord. Look at, jump down to verses 27 and 28, chapter 1. Verse 27, she says, "For this boy I prayed, and the Lord has given me my petition, which I asked of him. So I have also dedicated him to the Lord. As long as he lives, he is dedicated to the Lord." And he worshiped the Lord there, Samuel, her son. In obedience to her vow, when Hannah had Samuel turn around 3 years old, she took him to the tabernacle in Shiloh and handed him into the care of Eli. And now he would be raised right there at that tabernacle from the earliest years, serving in that tabernacle in the simple ways at first, but then more and more ways that he could serve. Samuel, the adopted son of Eli. And he was raised alongside Eli's 2 natural-born sons, Hophni and Phinehas. Because they were a priestly family, his 2 natural-born sons would naturally become priests. The family line of Aaron was chosen to be in the priesthood of Israel. And Hophni and Phinehas followed in their father's footsteps, but these were not good men, and that's putting it lightly. Look at verse 12. Jump back to verse 12. Or rather, move forward to chapter 2 and verse 12. It says, "Now the sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord." Now they were priests, right? Who did not know the Lord. My translation says they were worthless men. The NIV says wicked men. The King James, if you have that, translates it literally, which says they were sons of Belial. Anyone know? I thought that they were the sons of Eli. That was physically. Spiritually, they were the sons of Belial. Do anyone know who Belial is? Yeah, another name for Satan. Whoa. These men were priests, taking people's offerings and sacrifices, teaching the law of God, shepherding the people of Israel spiritually, and they were sons of Satan. They hated God. Yeah, that's who these men were. The passage goes on to explain some of their sins. It says that they used their positions as priests for personal gain because people would bring their animal sacrifices and they would be offered and slaughtered, and then they would either be put on a fire or sometimes the meat was boiled. It depended on the sacrifice. But they said, hey, before you do this, we want the best parts, the choicest cuts given to us, which was completely illegal. This was God's sacrifice. Now, after the sacrifice was all over, there were certain conditions in which the priests got a portion, because the priests didn't have their own tribe. They were to be taken care of kind of as an offering, tithe for all the different people that came, and they would eat off. But this was after the sacrifice. All of it was over and done with, and they could have some really specific portions of these sacrifices. They would go before anything was done, demand the most choice pieces of these sacrifices, and if the person would not allow it, which is absolutely their right, they would force them into giving them the meat. And this is everybody who's coming through the temple. Every citizen in Israel had to go through this. And these guys were abusing them, mistreating them, absolutely despising the holiness of what this was. This is how Israel remained in a right relationship with God, and they were using it for self-gratification and gain. In addition to that, there were young women who worked at the door of the tabernacle, helping people in and out. And they would force them to have sex with these two boys. These two men. What happened to these men that were raised in a godly home, at least a religious home, surrounded by religious things, and yet so far away from God? They didn't even know God. They hated God, despised what God said was holy. Amazing. So here's this family. You got a father who is the top leader in Israel, both religiously and politically. The most well-known man by far. And then you have this adopted son who's dedicated to serve God and is genuinely holy and worshiping God. And then you have these two natural-born sons who are just wicked sons of Satan. And that's this family. What went wrong that this man could have such wicked, wicked, wicked sons? The Bible doesn't tell us. These verses don't tell us, but there's a really good clue. A really good clue. Look at chapter 2, verses 22 to 25. It says, "Now when Eli was very old, and he heard that his sons were doing what his sons were doing to all Israel, and how they lay with the women who served in the doorway of the tent of meeting, he said to them, 'Why do you do such things? The evil things that I hear from these people? No, my sons, for the report is not good which I hear the Lord's people circulating. If one man sins against another, God will mediate for him. But if a man sins against the Lord,'" in other words, that's what you're doing, "who can intercede for him?" But they would not listen to the voice of their father, for the Lord had desired to put them to death. All right, here are these two sons. And they're so wicked, they don't care that people know about this. They're doing this out in the open. Everybody knows about this. They're coming to Eli, and they're telling him, "Your sons are sleeping with the women in the temple, and they're forcing people to give them the best cuts of meat." Everybody knew what was going on. They didn't care. That's how wicked they were. And what is Eli's response? He says, "Hey, what I'm hearing is not good. You guys shouldn't do this." That's it. What should have Eli's response been? Absolute outrage. Absolute outrage. And in obedience to the law of Moses, he should have had them killed. That's how bad what they were doing was. Let me read you Deuteronomy 21. It says, "If a man has a stubborn and rebellious son who does not obey his father and mother and will not listen to them when they discipline them, his father and mother shall take him and bring him to the elders of the gate of the town, and all the men of Israel shall stone him to death." They didn't have a lot of problems with rebellious teenagers in Israel. At least they shouldn't have if they were following the law of God, because they just wouldn't live very long. These young men should have been killed. In fact, it says here that God had determined already to kill them. It should have been done a long time ago, but it wasn't being done. Eli just basically, hey, and lightly scolds them. Lightly scolds them for acts worthy of death. Why did things go wrong in this family? There's a really strong clue of why things went wrong. So, because Eli wouldn't take action against his own family, God sends him a prophet to speak to him. I'll jump down to verse 27, chapter 2, verse 27. It says, Then a man of God came to Eli and said to him, Thus says the Lord, Did I not indeed reveal myself to the house of your father when they were in Egypt in bondage to Pharaoh's house? That's Aaron. And did I not choose them from all the tribes of Israel to be my priests, to go up to my altar, to burn incense, to carry an ephod before me? And did I not give to the house of your father all the fire offerings of the sons of God, sons of Israel? So incredible honor given to this family. Verse 29, Why do you kick at my sacrifice and at my offerings, which I have commanded in my dwelling? And honor your sons above me by making yourselves fat with the choicest of every offering of my people Israel. Eli would not act upon his son's disobedience. And God says, all right, let's call this what it is. So he sends the man of God to him. And it's not about Eli's sons that this message is about. It's about Eli the father that this message is sent. God sees his weak response and says, we need to call that what it is. You're honoring your sons above me. So here are Eli's sons, and here is God, and Eli is saying, I'll put them above God. That's what he says you're doing when you fail to discipline your sons for acts they should be killed for. And he lays the blame at Eli's feet for what's going wrong. Yes, he scolded them. Yes, he was upset. Yes, he was not happy, but he didn't take any action and virtually let it happen. Could have stopped it, could have really done something, but he didn't. Eli was part of this problem. That's the story. I see 3 lessons that we can learn. I'm sure there's more, but 3 at least. Number 1, preoccupation with a job can ruin your children. Preoccupation with a job can ruin your children. Eli was the top priest and the top judge of Israel. This job required a lot of traveling. Very busy, as you can imagine, just being the political leader, let alone the religious leader. We aren't told that this was a problem in his life, but it makes sense. It makes a great deal of sense that he was so busy with all his responsibilities that he neglected the real training of his sons. We don't know that for sure, but it certainly is something that happens today. Don't we see that? We see it very easily today where fathers get very, very busy with their job. And some fathers have a job where they don't have much of a choice. They are absolutely demanded with a lot of time and a lot of energy, and that's not what this is speaking to. The equivalent of this would be fathers who don't have to work overtime, but choose to anyway, for whatever reasons. Fathers who are, if it's not the job, busy with some other pastime, some other sport, some other thing that they desire, instead of being with their family and helping them. And it also describes the father who is actually physically home, but he's just not involved with his children. There are things that can take the place of being the father we should be, and that will ruin a family, because families need fathers. What is the price for not getting involved actively with your children? Well, it's losing your children. Here's Eli. Was he gone when his boys were in their formative years at needing to be guided into the ways of God? Was he gone when his sons started taking their first steps away from God and into evil? Was he gone so that they didn't see a godly example of how to pursue God and seek his face and love his ways? We don't know the answer to that, but that can happen to us as fathers. We can get so involved in other things that we're not there to be the example. There's one thing and it's very important, to speak the words of God to our families, but probably more important is showing them a life of godliness, because more is caught than taught in a home. You can speak all the right things, but if you're living against it, that's pretty much going to be empty words. They aren't going to have much of an impact. Huge amounts of impact are made by modeling a godly life. And you can't do that if you're not there for your children. We fathers need to be there for our children to guide them by our examples on what it's like to pursue God in his ways, to turn away from sin when we're tempted to go into it, and to guide our children away from sin as we see them getting involved with the wrong people and the wrong choices, to correct them and bring them back. They need our encouragement to pursue and find God in his ways. And again, we don't know if this was the sin of Eli, but it makes sense that it very well could be. And what do you do if you're a father who finds that you are away from your home and your kids a lot? What can you do? I think most of it is your attitude. Your attitude needs to be, my children are top priority for me. Being involved in their lives and moving them toward God and modeling what it is to be a godly parent. That's, I think, what matters most. So that means when you get home, spend time with your family. Spend time with your children. Move toward them on purpose. Yes, you may need a little alone time to gather your strength, but then move toward your children. You need to do what you can to cut off other distractions. If you need to set aside a particular sport or activity or thing that you really love doing for the sake of your kids, do that. You have, as we've said many times, a small window of opportunity to be an influence upon your children, and it's growing smaller every day because they're headed toward leaving the home where you won't have that same type of influence. You have it now when they're in your family. Use it now. Set aside other things. But make sure you're using that opportunity you have both in words and your modeling. And if you know about things in your life that aren't good, change them now, for no other reason, for their sake, certainly for God's sake and to please him, but for their sake, change these things that aren't right, because they will copy what they see. And you want to lead them in the paths of righteousness. And if your children are particularly needy, I would say to pray and ask God about getting a job that would be more family friendly. Allow your schedule to be more with your children. That is oftentimes what men have done for the sake of their families when they realized, I'm just not spending enough time with them. And again, that doesn't have to be a lifetime decision, but just as long as they are there in your home, do whatever it takes to make sure that you're fulfilling God's command to be able to guide them in the ways of God. No one is going to do this the way you can do it. No one's going to fill your shoes. You've been given that role. Unlike any other person in the world, you have that amount of influence. Make sure you're sacrificing what you need to sacrifice to make it happen. We must not let our jobs or pastimes or other interests become the reason that we neglect our children. So a first lesson that we can learn here is that we can let our jobs or other activities crowd out the time we should be spending with our children. Make sure that's not happening to you. A second lesson that I see in here is that refusing to deal with sin will ruin your child. In your insert, refusing to deal with sin in your child's life will ruin your children. Eli learned of his son's sins, and he showed that he was pained and that it grieved him and that it displeased him, but he took no real action against it. And it ruined his life and his children's lives. Can we commit that same sin today? Absolutely we can. At some point in your life as a parent, you hear about something that your child is doing wrong that is outside your area of influence. You have a teacher at school says, I'm really concerned about this, or a member in the church, or Sunday school class teacher, or someone in the neighborhood, and they come to you and they say, I've been seeing your child and this concerns me, or this is outright wrong that your child has done. And the question is, what's your response going to be to that? And I think we've all seen the parent who gets really defensive and won't listen to whatever another adult is saying and said, that's not my kid, I've got a good kid, and they would never do the wrong thing. And I think part of it might be the fact that it's a kind of backhanded criticism of the parent's parenting which it isn't necessarily, but it can feel that way. And so a parent gets defensive and says, well, that's not true. And yes, adults who are observing your child can be missing out on what the truth is and not get it right. But man, we need to listen. We need to evaluate. We need to go and check it out rather than just dismiss it out of hand. Say, that person's always been, a difficult person to deal with. The people in that family, they've got their problems. Why they're trying to tell me what to do, and on by dismissing and, not listening to the criticisms that other people might make. That can be very painful to do, but man, we have to look into it. You're in charge of their direction of their life. And if you hear that it's off the track and you don't do anything, well, then you're Eli. And that led to great disaster. Do not do that. We don't like to think of our kids being bad, but you know you were bad as a kid. You know all the times you did bad things, and your kids are doing the same thing. Proverbs says foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. That means self-rule. I'm going to do what I want to do, when I want to do it, how I want to do it. That's in the heart of every single child. And God says it takes the discipline of a loving parent to work that out of them. And when we look the other way and blame other people and dismiss it, man, we're letting our kid down. I think we all know the Proverbs that speak about this. Proverbs 13:24, he who spares the rod spares discipline. He who spares discipline hates his son. But he who loves him is careful to discipline him. Do you hate your child? Of course I don't hate my child. Well, are you disciplining them when they do the wrong thing? Are you giving them the proper amount of discipline? Because if you're not, you hate your child. Maybe not emotionally, but you're treating them with hatred because you're causing them to be an adult, becoming an adult who isn't taking responsibility for walking in God's ways. It is the pain of loving discipline, and I mean loving, not abusive discipline. It's the pain of loving discipline that causes a child to reflect on his ways. I shouldn't repeat that, and so I'm going to move in this other direction, and you're pointing in God's direction to go. And when you don't make it painful to move away from God, you're encouraging it. The most loving thing you can do for a child who sins is to discipline them in love. Proverbs 29:15. The rod of correction imparts wisdom, but a child left to himself disgraces his mother. Proverbs 29:17. Discipline your son, and he will give you peace. He will bring delight to your soul. Those two verses talk about the benefits to parents who will lovingly discipline their child. It says, that child will bring you peace and delight your soul if you do loving discipline to your child. And I know some of you with really young kids are thinking, it's never ending. I'm constantly telling my kid what not to do and giving them loving discipline, and I'm really exhausted. Don't stop, okay? Satan wants you to stop. Your child wants you to stop. Society will say, you should just let your child bloom like a flower and never discipline. These are evil words. These are not the words of God. God gives us the words of obedience, and that is discipline your child lovingly, or you're actually hating them. And then when you do lovingly discipline them, they'll bring you peace, and they'll bring you delight. It says, the rod of correction imparts wisdom. What is wisdom? Wisdom is making the best possible choices. So how do you help your child make the best possible choices? Correct them lovingly when they go off the track. That will help them make the best possible choices in life. And you neglect that. You be soft on them. Let them get away with it. Dismiss or excuse their bad behavior. You're not teaching them the best choices. You're teaching them the worst choices. Parent, make sure that you aren't failing your child here. A great reason why this family before us was ruined is because the father did not take responsibility for correcting his sons, disciplining his sons when they sinned. We can't afford, your child can't afford you to let that happen. A third lesson that we can learn through this, and again, this terrible family, was the bright spot in this terrible family. Look at chapter 2, verse 26. It says, "Now the boy Samuel was growing in stature and in favor, both with the Lord and with men." It's right in the middle of this dark, wicked, satanic family was this beautiful, glowing gem of Samuel. He was not just growing up physically, but growing up spiritually and socially as he interacted with people and as he interacted with God. The Bible testifies it was brilliant. It was glowing. Now, that's a wonderful thing to hear in the best of families. But what about the most wicked of families? How in the world did that come about? It certainly wasn't by watching the other people around him. How in the world did he come to be such a beautiful, godly young man? Well, again, these verses don't give us the specific reason, but I think there's a very clear reason why it happened. His mother, Hannah, delivered him at 3 years old to the tabernacle, and what was she known for? Earnest prayer. It says she prayed earnestly, and the Lord gave her the desire of her heart. In fact, not only did she give her Samuel, she had other sons and daughters. She had been barren up until that point. God just opened her ability to have children. But Samuel was the one that was the first one. She dedicated him, and she didn't stop. She made that incredible sacrifice of dedicating him over to God, and then it says every year that they would go up and she would give him gifts and continued to have him very important in her life, as any mother would. And is there any doubt that she continued to pray earnestly for her son? Absolutely not. She prayed him into this world, and she certainly prayed him through this wicked family that was going on. And remember, all Israel knew. She knew what this family was like. Can you imagine how much more intensely she would have prayed because of that? And God answered those prayers. A third lesson that I see here in your insert: praying for your children can protect them from sin. Praying for your children can protect them from sin. And you say, of course it can, but really, it can. Look at this example. And don't dismiss this as an incredibly powerful and important point. I know that all you parents with children shudder as you think about your children going off into the world. It has become a pit of filth and pollution out there. Just in the last 10 years, our country has nosedived in so many terrible ways. And the thought that my children are going to go live in that can fill you with dread and fear. But this passage teaches us to turn that dread and fear into prayer, earnest praying. You have a wonderful opportunity to have all of that energy, outrage, and concern be channeled into talking to God about protecting your child. Channel it that way. Don't just become anxious and depressed and pulling your hair out. Take all that energy and pray. Pray, pray, pray. God wrapped a protective bubble around Samuel in this wicked family and brought him into a place where he became one of the greatest men that Israel ever knew, out of such a pit of wickedness. And God can do the same thing for your child as they're going out into the world in ways you can't control. You as a parent, you can try to put boundaries and set things up, and yes, you must do that, but there are certain times that are going to come where you can't control the situation. Pray that protective bubble around them. Pray earnestly for your kids. Pray that they, number one, choose godly friends and refuse ungodly friends. Make godly choices and refuse ungodly choices. That you would right now start praying for their spouse, that God would give them a godly spouse. Get on your knees and turn all that anxiety into prayer. And then as you rise from your knees, say, that prayer was pleasing and that prayer was powerful. You aren't just hoping in prayer, you're releasing power in prayer. We see this in the many examples in the Bible. Job, first chapter of Job, God was talking about what a godly man he was, and he gave us one of the examples of what Job did for his children. Job's children had moved out of his house and they were adults now, but it says that every year they would celebrate their siblings' birthdays, meeting in their houses and celebrating and eating and drinking. And this is what it says. Now, again, it's just Job and his wife in his house. Children are living off on their own. It says this in Job 1:5. When their celebrations ended, Job would send for his children in order to cleanse them from sin. And he would get up early in the morning and sacrifice burnt offerings for each of them. Job thought, my children may have sinned and cursed God in their hearts during the celebrations. So Job offered sacrifices for them all the time. Wow. Job's regular practice was to offer sacrifices and prayers to God for his adult children so that they would spiritually keep moving toward God. That's a good example for us. David, in Psalm 144:12, he prays this prayer. May our sons in their youth be like tall young plants. May our daughters be like stately columns that adorn the corners of a palace. David prayed for his children. Strong, tall, standing for God. My daughters like pillars, strong, sturdy, godly. We need to pray for our children. Prayers are powerful. When our son Samuel was in middle school, I saw the next year he was going to head up into the high school, and it filled me with dread because there's so much more exposure to sin and pressure. And I found myself worrying about it, and then I just remembered all this. Hey, I'm just going to start praying. And every day I'll just pray, God, give him your absolute protection from evil as he's there. And then I can't just then hope it happens. I will say, no, you are going to protect him. And of course, I have to watch over him as well and do my part. But to pray every single day, I started praying, and that brought me peace of mind as he went into high school. And then I thought, well, why am I waiting until the entrance into high school? So I said, I'll start praying for my other kids. And I think Emma Dene was probably still in elementary school. So I started praying for all of our 4 kids every single day. God, provide for them all their needs, and God, keep them from evil. And then Samuel left high school, and I thought, am I going to stop praying for him? He was going into the Marines. Man, I need to pick up my prayers. So I kept praying as he left. And then it occurred to me over the years, can I think of a good reason to stop praying every day for my children? I can't. And so it's been my intention, with the help of God, to continue praying for my children every day of my life. Pouring out those protective prayers and prayers of provision. And they're moving toward God. Because as a parent, I don't see that there's a time that I can stop. There's good examples of it in the Bible, and I would encourage every parent, pray every day for your child. They are moving into a world that hates them, that is full of lies, that is full of vulgar, polluted horrors. And if we don't do anything, they're going to be sucked down into it. But we can do things, and not just something, we can do powerful things. Speaking the words of God, living a godly example in front of them, and praying powerful prayers for them, like we see here in the Bible. It is absolutely right for parents to pray for your children. Just to remind you, Matthew 7, ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and it will be opened to you. Everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and he who knocks, it will be opened. John 14:13, whatever you ask in my name, I will do it, Jesus says. So parents, pray. Grandparents, pray. Aunts and uncles, siblings, pray for our children as they go out into the world. They must be guarded, or they're going to be pulled down. Our prayers can powerfully protect our children from sin. So, what makes a nation strong? People of strong character. Families that are strong. How can we fix the troubled families in our nation? We can't, but we can make sure our family is the strongest family it can be, and that can influence others. So start right at home. These 3 principles, these 3 lessons from here. Did God have you here? Did he bring any of these to your attention this morning because he wants you to take action in your family with one of these? Number 1, preoccupation with a job or anything else can ruin your children. Are you giving the proper attention to your child, grandchild, nephew, niece, whoever it might be? God has placed us each in an area to influence. Are you maximizing that? Or is there ways you could do it better? And I don't mean going to extremes and out of balance. But is there a way you can reasonably give yourself better to a child in your family? Then do it. Make sure you're doing that. Tell God you'll do that as we close in prayer. Number 2, refusing to deal with sin will ruin your child. Is there something in your child, grandchild, nephew, niece that you see that needs to be addressed? And maybe you're not the proper one to address it, but at least go to a person who is directly over them and speak to them about your concern. And if you're one of those parents hearing these concerns, listen. Don't dismiss it. God may be bringing that to your attention because that child is in a dangerous spot. And you are the one who can stand between them moving toward God or moving them away from God. Listen, parents. If God in any way has impressed upon you some young person that needs to be corrected and lovingly disciplined, move toward that situation today. And then number 3, pray for your children that God will protect them from sin. Do you need to increase your prayers for your child, for your nephew, niece, grandchild? Whatever needs to be done, do it. Prayers are powerful. God says, I'll do what you ask. Then pray for it. And yes, there's other things that need to be taken into account, their own choices and the choices of people around them, but make sure your choice is exercising the influence you can give by praying powerfully for these young ones. We live in a world that is terribly troubled, but there's a way to fix it. And then making our families as strong as possible. Make sure you are doing your part to be the best influence upon these young lives that you can be. There's a good Father's Day message. We all need to hear this, not just fathers, but families are important to God, and He's showing us here how to have strong families. Make sure you're playing your part in all of that.